Think back to January 28, 1977. It was a Friday. The kind of crisp, bright winter morning that makes you feel like the worst of the season is behind you. In Buffalo, New York, the sun was actually shining. Factory workers punched in at the steel mills. Secretaries settled into their desks in downtown high-rises. Children sat in classrooms watching the clock, waiting for the weekend to begin. It felt normal, it felt routine, but nobody, not the weathermen, not the mayor, and certainly not the drivers enjoying the clear roads, knew that the geography itself was loading a weapon. You see, Lake Erie was frozen solid, a massive, flat plain of ice stretching all the way to Canada, and sitting on top of that ice was a winter's worth of loose, powdery snow. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark came in the form of a low-pressure system that didn't just bring wind, it brought a hurricane. By lunchtime, the world they knew, the street signs, the skyline, the roads home, would be erased. The enemy wasn't falling from the sky, it was the sky itself, turning the ground against the people. For the next 4 days, western New York would be under siege by the White Hurricane. The storm didn't arrive with a warning, it arrived with a violence that is hard to describe. Around 11:30 in the morning, the blue sky vanished. It wasn't replaced by clouds, it was replaced by a wall of white, thousands of feet high, screaming across the frozen lake at 70 miles per hour. It hit the city of Buffalo like a physical blow. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in minutes. The wind chill crashed to 60 below zero. In the offices downtown, people looked out the window and saw the city disappear. 1 minute, you could see the building across the street. The next, you couldn't see the glass of your own window. It was zero visibility, total whiteout. The deception was over. The ambush had begun. This wasn't a normal snowstorm where the snow falls down. In the blizzard of '77, the snow didn't fall. It swirled. It blasted horizontally. It was torn from the surface of Lake Erie and sand-blasted against the city. It packed into engines. It packed into keyholes. It packed into the lungs of anyone foolish enough to step outside. The trap sprung immediately, and unlike other storms that trap people in their homes, this one trapped a city in motion.
This blizzard is the one for the ages. Certainly it is the blizzard of the century.
Because it hit on a Friday afternoon, everyone tried to leave at once. Thousands of cars flooded the streets. And then they stopped.
The wild thing about that blizzard is you could rarely go outside. So we went out once or twice to try to slide down some of the big dunes. But
the snow hit the hot engines and flash froze. Windshields iced over instantly. Wipers snapped off trying to clear the heavy, concrete-like packing snow. On the Skyway, the elevated highway that cuts through the city, cars were pinned against the guardrails by the wind. Drivers couldn't see the hood ornaments of their own vehicles. Panic set in. There were no cell phones to call home, no GPS to find a route around the jam, just white darkness. People abandoned their cars right in the middle of the street. They opened their doors and were nearly blown over by the force of the wind. They formed human chains, holding hands, blind and freezing, stumbling toward the nearest doorway. That night, department stores became refugee camps. Bars became shelters. In the Statler Hotel downtown, people slept in the lobby, in the hallways, in the ballroom. Strangers slept on the floor of a Kleinhans music hall. If you were at work, you lived at work. If you were at school, you slept in the gym. There was no getting home.
This is something else, man.
The roads hadn't just become impassable, they had ceased to exist. The drifts weren't measured in inches, they were measured in stories. As the sun went down, though you couldn't see the sun, only a gray, swirling void, the siege moved to the homes. For those lucky enough to be inside their own houses, the battle was just beginning. In 1977, Buffalo homes were old, sturdy, wood frame houses, but they weren't built for this. The wind drove the snow through the cracks in the siding. It forced snow through the electrical outlets. People watched in horror as snow began to pile up inside their living rooms, drifting against the baseboards. The natural gas lines began to freeze. The power grid flickered and died. The furnace, the beating heart of the home, went silent. Inside, the temperature began to drop. You could see your breath in the kitchen. Families huddled in a single room, usually the one with the least windows. They hung blankets over the doorways. They wore their winter coats, their hats, their boots, sitting on their own sofas. You simply endured. There was no choice but to survive. The snow didn't stop. It drifted and drifted and drifted. By the second day, first-floor windows were completely buried. The drifts reached the eaves of the roof. People woke up in darkness because their house was literally buried inside a mountain of snow. To get out, you didn't open the front door. You couldn't. It was blocked by 10 feet of hard-packed ice. You went upstairs, you opened a bedroom window, and you tunneled out. People dug tunnels from their second-story windows just to check on their neighbors. They crawled like moles through the white landscape. Chimneys had to be cleared by hand, because if they clogged, the carbon monoxide would kill everyone inside. The isolation was total. You were an island. The radio was the only link to the outside world. The DJs stayed on air for days, reading messages, telling jokes, trying to keep the city sane while the wind howled like a banshee outside. But inside that frozen struggle, there was a divide. For the adults, the blizzard of '77 was a catastrophe. It was the fear of the pipes bursting. It was the anxiety of the food running out. It was the terror of knowing that if a fire started, the fire trucks could never reach them. But for the kids, it was magic. School was canceled. Not for a day, for weeks. The city was paralyzed, but the playground was infinite. The snow was packed so hard by the wind that you could walk on top of it without sinking. You could walk right up the drift and stand on the roof of your house. Kids sledded off the roofs of garages. They jumped from second-story windows into soft piles of powder. They didn't see the danger. They saw a world transformed. The cars were gone, buried under mounds that looked like white whales. The streets were gone. It was a blank canvas. They built forts that were indestructible. They dug caves. They walked to the corner store, if it was open, pulling sleds behind them to get milk and bread for their parents, feeling like Arctic explorers. To a 10-year-old in 1977, the blizzard wasn't a disaster. It was the greatest adventure of their lives. They didn't see the worry in their mother's eyes as she counted the cans of soup. They only saw the snow. By the third day, the city was on its knees. The mayor declared a state of emergency. The president declared a major disaster. But Washington was far away, and the snow was right here. And this is where the legend of Buffalo was forged. They call it the City of Good Neighbors, and in 1977, that wasn't just a slogan on a billboard. It was a survival strategy. When the police cars got stuck, the snowmobiles took over. Civilians, just regular guys with sleds, became the emergency services. They organized rescue squads. They drove over the tops of buried cars to deliver insulin to diabetics. They carried pregnant women to hospitals. They brought bread to the elderly. The laws of the road didn't apply. The snowmobile was king, and the neighbors. There was no social media. You had to physically check on the people next door, and people did. If you had a working stove, you cooked for the whole street. Strangers slept on living room floors. People shared what little they had: coffee, cigarettes, a six-pack of Jenny cream ale. If a car was stuck, 6 people appeared out of the mist to push it. There was no looting. There was no chaos. There was just a gritty, stubborn determination to get through it. The adversity stripped away the superficial barriers. In the face of the storm, everyone was equal. Everyone was cold, and everyone needed each other. A famous story from the time talks about a bread truck that got stranded. The driver, realizing he wasn't going anywhere, opened the back doors and just started handing out loaves to the people stuck in the cars behind him. He didn't ask for money, he just fed them. That was the spirit of '77. When the wind finally died down and the sun returned, the devastation was revealed. It looked like a war zone, but white. The snow was 30 feet high in places. Houses were completely invisible. The cleanup wasn't just shoveling. It was an excavation. The National Guard was flown in. They brought heavy machinery, front-end loaders, massive plows. But even the tanks struggled. The snow was so packed it was like concrete. They had to lift the snow out of the city dump trucks and drive it away. They dumped it in the river. They dumped it in parking lots. And as they dug, they found the tragedy. They found the cars buried on the highway with people still inside. 29 people died in western New York. Some froze in their cars. Some died shoveling. Some died in their unheated homes. It took weeks for the city to reopen. It took months for the snow to melt. In some parking lots, the mounds of snow were still there in May, black and gritty, a stubborn reminder of the siege. The blizzard of '77 changed Buffalo forever. It gave the city a reputation for snow that it has never shaken, even though it was the wind, not the snow, that was the real killer. But it also revealed the city's character. It taught a generation that when the grid fails, and the government is helpless, and the lights go out, you can rely on the person living next door. It was a time of hardship, yes. It was a battle against the elements. But looking back through the lens of history, it was also a time when we saw the best in ourselves. For those who lived through it, the blizzard of '77 isn't just a weather event. It's a badge of honor. It's the story you tell when the snow starts to fall. You lean back, you look at the dusting on the ground, and you say, "You think this is snow? Let me tell you about the time we walked on the roof. We survived the white hurricane, and we will never forget it." Were you there in '77? Do you remember the tunnel from the window or the sleds on the roof? Drop a comment below and share your story.